Welcome to Anatomy Lesson 6.04, where we're going to introduce vertebra. And so we want to start off by looking at the vertebral column where all of the vertebrae are articulated together. We had said earlier in our divisions that we divide the vertebra into three regions, and there's a total of five. So we start off and we have cervical, which would be the neck. Cervical. And we said it's easy to remember because just remember when you eat breakfast, lunch, and supper. So you're going to eat breakfast at 7, there's 7 cervical vertebra. As you come down, then we go to thoracic, and there are going to be 12 of those. We eat lunch at 12, and then we have our lumbar vertebra, and there's 5 of those, eat separate, 5. Beneath the lumbar vertebra, here we have the sacrum. And below that, we have the coccyx, C-O-C-C-Y-X. And if you look at the vertebra before we, start to jump into each of the categories, so this is a posterior view and this is a lateral view. So here we have posterior. Here we have lateral. So look at the cervical. Do you notice that we have these large processes that come off the side, but in the cervical, they're not present. If you look at the lumbar, they're wider, they're thicker. The bodies or the main parts of the lumbar are going to be wider because we have different things happening at different parts of your vertebral column. Now, through all of these, we have the spinal cord that runs through an opening in the middle of each of the vertebra. And that's kind of the job, is to protect the spinal cord. But we have to have information coming in and out of that spinal cord. So we have openings for nerves along the sides, but that's why we have down here where we have to do a lot of support, we've got bigger, fatter, wider, big processes. Up here, they're smaller, more narrow. We're not supporting as much weight. And so you see a change. And we're going to learn about the characteristics of each of these and some of the main characteristics then of the sacrum. You'll notice too, when we look laterally, we have these curves. Well, that's normal. And each of these curves has a name. So this is lateral, this is anterior, and this is posterior. So from this lateral view, this would be the front and this would be the back. And you'll notice that so we call this an anterior curve, and we call this a posterior curve because this is in the cervical. We call this the anterior cervical curve. Anterior cervical curve. So this goes to the posterior. So this is the posterior thoracic curve. Can you guess what the name for this is going to be? Yeah, it's the anterior lumbar curve. And we call this the posterior pelvic curve. Well, when we're born, we have our posterior curves. Those are present at birth. So this is present at birth. This is present at birth. But these anterior curves don't develop until we get to be a little bit older. Well, what is it that develops them? Well, when babies start to hold up their head, we start to develop this anterior curve. And then when we start to walk, we develop this anterior lumbar curve. Humans are unique. We're the only animal that walks upright on 2 legs. Gorillas aren't considered to do that. They walk on their knuckles too. And so our vertebral columns develop some interesting curves because of that. We have some features here. So we have holes. The way when these vertebrae articulate with one another or stack, it forms holes in between, and these are called intervertebral because they're between vertebra. So here I have intervertebral, and they're openings, so they're foramen. And we have lots of nerves that pass. We have these big nerve bundles that pass in and out. In between each of the vertebra, and we'll do this in green, we have intervertebral discs. So these green are intervertebral discs. They're made of, and we're going to talk about these a little bit. So let's put some notes up here. So let the intervertebral discs. Intervertebral discs. Number one, they're made of fibrocartilage, FIBROCARTILAGE, which is the second hardest substance in the body, only second to bone. It's the toughest cartilage we have, and we don't have it in a lot of places, but we have it in our intervertebral discs. And the way that these discs are made up, let me switch colors. Let's do light blue. We've got a ring of fibrocartilage. And inside of that, so this ring of fibrocartilage is called the annulus fibrosus. Inside of the ring of fibrocartilage, we have a kind of a filling, and I'm going to do it in pink. So it's a jelly-like, it's a gel substance it's called the nucleus pulposus, Nucleus, nucleus pulposus. And it's a jelly, it's got the consistency of a really thick gel. But we can run into a problem. Sometimes because of the pressure that's exerted, so these are continually squeezed from above and beyond, what can happen is I can get my annulus fibrosus can crack. And what happens is that allows the nucleus pulposus to ooze out. So we call this a herniated or a bulging, well, let me do both. So sometimes it doesn't break. Let's just do, shoot. Sometimes the nucleus pulposus can press on a spot, and you can develop a weakness in your annulus fibrosus. So here it's developed a bulge. We would call this a bulging disc. But what can happen is this bulge, if there's a nerve bundle that runs close to this particular portion, this is a nerve, it can press on a nerve and it can create a lot of pain for us. Sometimes the annulosus fibrosus completely ruptures, and this is what we would call a ruptured disc. And again, if I've got a nerve that's running along here and this is pressing on a nerve, it can cause horrible, horrible pain. People sometimes that have bulging discs and ruptured discs have a great deal of pain. But what we see is it's this nucleus pulposus that's either bulging or rupturing through the fibrocartilage ring and can press on a nerve. So that's a nerve up here. All right, so what are our takeaways? Today we looked at the vertebral column as a whole. We saw that we have divisions, and we talked about the number of vertebrae in each division, that we have curves. Some of those curves are present at birth. Some develop as we hold up our head and walk. We have intervertebral foramen, and then we talked a little bit about the intervertebral discs. and what happens if you get a ruptured disc. So in the following videos, we're going to talk specifically about cervical and the specifics to cervical, and then we'll do thoracic and lumbar as a video as well. All right, that's all for now.